So I have both the Nintendo Switch 2 and the Steam Deck here. They're both weirdly similar, but also wildly different at the same time. One is an open platform and one is a closed platform, something which I'll explain later on in the video, and I'll also share which one I would choose if I had to choose one. So I have the Steam Deck LCD model here, which is probably the closest to the Nintendo Switch 2 when it comes to specs and price. The Steam Deck LCD starts at $399 and the Nintendo Switch 2 starts at $449. That's a $50 difference between the two machines, with the Switch 2 being more expensive. But the Switch 2 does have an upper hand here because in the box you get a dock and all the cables that you need to connect it to a TV. You also get a Joy-Con sort of controller accessory sort of thing. So even with that $50 difference, I do feel like it makes up for it with the included accessories, because with the Steam Deck you don't get anything apart from a case. You just don't get anything else with it. As handhelds though, the Steam Deck is bigger, thicker and heavier. I also think it's quite ugly. I don't think it's actually that nice looking. The Switch 2 though looks a lot more refined and just more inviting to play. Nintendo have done such a good job of upgrading and refining the device compared to the original Switch. It just looks a lot more polished. The Steam Deck doesn't seem to have that polish, but to be fair, it is their first model, so maybe the Steam Deck 2 will be nicer. I definitely find the Steam Deck comfier to hold though, and it's not even close. The grips are bigger, the bottom corners of the device sort of slope away to make it much more comfortable in the hand. The buttons and the triggers are also bigger on the Steam Deck, and there are proper triggers as well, compared to just the clicky triggers on the Switch 2. Also, the joysticks on the Steam Deck I just feel like are better. Unfortunately, Nintendo are still using the same joysticks from the Switch 1, which were prone to drifting, just lots of issues. A lot of people had issues with them. I don't know why they haven't completely sort of overhauled it. That's a really weird decision by them. And like I said, the Steam Deck is heavier, but I don't actually find it too much of an issue. I feel like this will be much more of a preference thing, because I think when you're using any of these devices, you're most likely probably resting your hands either on a table or something, or on sort of cushions, or maybe, for example, like me, I use my devices a lot on flights. I usually have them on the armrests on the flights. So yeah, I feel like it's weird because even though the Switch 2 is lighter, because it's thinner, it actually feels denser and feels heavier, even though I know it's not. Like, it's definitely not. The Steam Deck 2 is just a bit more hollow. It's not as dense, and I feel like the weight is quite evenly distributed. But yeah, holding them up like this, I don't think anyone's going to be using them holding them up like this for extended period of time, because yeah, over time, if you're holding them up and you don't have any support on your arms, I think both of them are just going to end up having aching feelings in your arms and shoulders. Both of these models have LCD displays, and there is no doubt that the LCD display in the Switch 2 is better than the Steam Deck. The display on the Switch 2 just looks more vibrant, has more contrast. Now, that doesn't mean the Steam Deck is bad, it's just when you look at them side by side, the Switch 2 display looks better. And the Switch 2 is higher resolution, so everything is sharper. I found the UI and the text especially look sharper on the Switch 2. Technically, the Steam Deck is a 800p display, so it's very close to 720p, and this is a 1080p display. But when you're using it, like I said, I think with the Switch 2, the text looks a bit sharper, but when you're actually playing a game, you're not going to tell the difference that much. Thankfully, both offer expandable storage via micro SD card slots, so you aren't limited to their default storage capacities of 256 gigabytes. But there is one trick here that the Steam Deck has, and it's that you can actually take off the back cover and replace the SSD, the NVMe storage in there manually if you like to, and you can upgrade it to whatever you like. That's the benefit of having an open platform, and it's really not that hard to do. You can watch a YouTube tutorial and it's very easy to do. The Switch 2, that is not the case. The 256 gigabytes is soldered to the board, and the only way to upgrade the storage is to use the micro SD card slot. So one of the biggest differences between these two devices is that the Steam Deck is an open platform and the Nintendo Switch 2 is a closed platform. And the difference between the two is that because the Steam Deck is an open platform, it's just a lot more sort of modifiable. There's a lot more things you can do with it, because technically this is a PC. It's a Linux PC in a handheld device, which means you can load up all sorts of applications, all sorts of things. You can even use it as a PC, so you can connect a keyboard and mouse to it, connect it up to a display and have a PC on the go. Nintendo Switch 2 is just limited to what you can see, what you can do with it, which is just play Nintendo games. That is pretty much it. And Nintendo are also very strict about that. If you try to modify your device, if you try to do anything with it, they can brick your device, they can ban your Nintendo account. They're very strict on that sort of thing. And I get it, it makes sense. They want to keep the platform easy to use for most people. They don't want people to be hacking around and stuff. They want you to be able to just pick this up, start playing, easy to go, easy to use, family friendly, you could say. And I get that. They want to completely own the experience all the way through. They just don't want people to run into issues, basically. However, because the platforms are so different, the game libraries also differ massively. Technically, you can play pretty much any PC game on the Steam Deck. Now, whether you should play any PC game, that's really up to you, because Steam do have a section on their store basically listing all the games that are great on the Steam Deck. And that's really nice to see, because you can see games that developers have made to basically adapt to the Steam Deck. And because of that, like I said, you get an absolutely huge library of games compared to the Nintendo Switch 2. With the Nintendo Switch 2, it's very much limited to what Nintendo say can go on the console. They can easily sort of just remove games if they want to. So yeah, there is a big difference there. And what I love about the Steam Deck is that you can get a lot more indie games from very small developers that are just experimenting, that want to have a go at making a game. You can get those games, and sometimes they're amazing. Nintendo does have an upper hand here when it comes to exclusives though, right? If you want to play a Nintendo game, if you want to play like a Mario game, Zelda game, Pokemon game, whatever it might be, you're going to be limited to the Switch. Like, you won't be able to get it on the Steam Deck. I say you won't be able to get it on the Steam Deck. I know people who, I can't say in this video, but you could, but you couldn't. That's all I can really say. But yeah, if you want to get Nintendo games and you want to play Nintendo games exclusively, then I feel like this does sort of make more sense. Games for the Steam Deck though are considerably a lot cheaper, and Steam regularly runs sales where you can get games for sometimes more than 50% off. So you can save a lot of money by buying games for the Steam Deck. That is not the case with Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo have now upped the pricing of the games. So before, games used to be $60, now they're $80. $80 to get their own exclusives on the Nintendo Switch 2. I think that is just a crazy amount of money for games for a machine like this. You know, even PlayStation games, Xbox games, PC games aren't getting up to that sort of price. Now, I know you can get them for that sort of price, but they regularly come down in price. That is not going to happen. Nintendo usually, for their own games, keep them at that price. You will never really get them on sale. This is again the benefit of an open platform. You can save a lot of money by just finding games, buying games that regularly come on sale. Battery life I found varies widely on both devices because it just depends on what you're playing. If you're playing like a very high intense game like Cyberpunk or something, then yeah, you're gonna kill battery life. But then if you're playing simple games, indie games, card games, whatever, I mean, like Balatro for example, yeah, the battery life will last ages. The OLED model though lasts even longer because of course it has the OLED screen. What I usually do is carry around this Anker power bank that I recently got, and yeah, it can just plug straight into it because it has USB cables built into the power bank, and it lasts me for a long flight, no problem. Because of the included dock in the box, Nintendo haven't just made a handheld though, they've also made a traditional console that can sit alongside your TV. And I feel like this is a big USP of the Switch 2. Nintendo want people to be able to use it as a console that they can also share with others, friends and family. Games like Mario Kart, where you can connect multiple controllers and people can play split screen, has just become something that Nintendo has been leaning into a lot. They want friends and family to be playing together in the same space. And it's what I love most about the Switch 2. I love being able to play with friends and we all have fun together. There's a magic to that you just won't get by playing games online. I love that Nintendo seems to be one of the only gaming companies right now that is pushing more local split screen games, sort of pushing that experience of playing games together. You just won't get that experience with the Steam Deck. So even though they're both handhelds, like I said earlier, I feel as though they're also wildly different. They both have their own unique features and reasons to buy. The Switch 2 seems to be the more simpler, more family-friendly handheld. It's designed to be easy to get going and use. The included dock also makes it easy to set up as a console, and I love the ability to play games locally with others. However, if I were to choose one and I couldn't have both, the one I would go with is the Steam Deck. For me, the Steam Deck is the winner. The Steam Deck for me just makes more sense. I find it more comfortable to use. The amount of games I can play on it is wild, and I can emulate old games too. The open nature of it also makes it easy to modify and change things if I want to, but at the same time, if I don't, I can just use it as it is. I feel like I would also recommend it to others who don't really care about Nintendo exclusives. Maybe you don't care about playing the latest Mario game or the latest Pokemon game or Zelda game, whatever it might be. You just want a handheld that you want to play on the go. You want to have access to a huge games library. I do think this just makes more sense right now as a handheld. And I don't know when or if Steam will make a version 2, But what they are doing is they're making the software, the Steam OS, available to other manufacturers, and that means we're going to see a lot more other handhelds using the same sort of system, the same OS, so you can get the same experience as a Steam Deck on other devices. That will also mean devices that are bigger, devices that are smaller, devices that just differ in lots of different ways, and that's the benefit of an open platform. And then there is also the Steam Deck OLED, which is more expensive, but you do get that glorious OLED display. You get better battery life because of the OLED display, you get a better chip, and you get double the storage. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, and you can also regularly find it refurbished and discounted in places as well. So it's a really good value console. But that doesn't mean the Switch 2 is a bad console. The Switch 2 is still an incredible console. I think what Nintendo have done here and the sort of refinements and changes they've made from the Switch on, it just feels like a lot more of a mature product. I think the only reason to buy this is if you want to play those Nintendo games. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter and subscribe for more.
Wait, that's one of them, boy.
That's not fair.
Have another one.
Oi!
Oi, have one more. Oh shit, I missed.
What's this?